Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I've got a video that I'm excited about. It's going to be part informative, part tech talk, part new product launch, kind of all at once. So a lot of information that I'm going to share with you guys on this video. And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like the videos, hit the like button as well. That really helps us out. So let's get rolling on this thing. I have a lot of people asking me often, what's the best sounding speaker? Or what's your best sounding speaker? Or they'll give me a list of products that they own. I own this receiver and I own this CD player and this, and these are my cables and this is my, and they give me a list of gear and they say, what speaker do you recommend? Well, all of those questions are really tough to answer because there's no right answer. If you ask me what's the best sounding speaker, I guess in a way it's easy because it's in extremes. They're sitting right back here behind me. It's hard to touch those at any price point. And it's our best sounding speaker. But it's not the best speaker for every application. And when you guys send me a whole list of gear and ask me what speaker do you recommend, I have to respond and say, I can't recommend a speaker for you based on that information. The information I need to know is about your room. How big is your room? What's your application? Are you setting them on your desktop? Are you setting them well out into the room? Are you limited as to how far you can pull them out of the room? How much treatment do you have? What's your SPL capability or limitations? In other words, how loud do you need it to be? Because how big is your room? There's a whole list of questions that need to be answered so that the right speaker can be recommended for you or for your application. Obviously, a 7-foot tall speaker that needs to be 3 or 4 feet out into the room, if not 8 or 10 feet out into a room, with stacks of servo-controlled woofers next to it, it's not going to be the right speaker for every application. Despite how great they sound, for every pair of the in extremes I sell, I probably sell about 40 pairs of the little XLS Encore over here, because these things fit a lot of applications. I have customers that are using these in their home studios. They're using them for mixing. They're using them for mastering. I've got guys using them on their desktops. It's kind of a big speaker for a desktop, but I have them being used on their desktops. I have customers that have them 8 feet out into their rooms with a matching servo sub, and that's their 2-channel system. I have people that are using them with them on stands against the wall, or they're sitting on a shelf, or they're mounted to the wall, or they're using them in the garage for music in the garage where they work. There's just I've got customers use them as rear surrounds in their home theater system. I have customers using them at all the channels in their home theater systems. So yeah, a lot of applications for a great sounding little stand mounted speaker. So it really depends on the application as to what's the best thing for me to recommend to you. And we try to design the best speakers for each application. Maybe you have an application for a big and extreme. Most people don't, though. And if you're like me, despite the fact that you have a really high-end audio system that you listen to a lot, I still spend far more of my time sitting right in front of my computer, answering messages, doing work, doing emails and stuff like that. And even at the shop, we have music going all the time. And there's a desktop application there for everybody. I mean, everybody sits at their desk. And so we've tried to design some of the best speakers for that application. So that's what really drove us to design the next version of the LGK model. And this is LGK 2.0. And we've had these out there for a little bit now, and customers are loving these things. But they're specific to the application. They can be used as a desktop, or they can be used as small speakers in a small room. Now, if you run these things full range, you're limited to about 10 watt peaks max. Otherwise, you run this little 3-inch driver out of X max, it's just not going to play down very low or move a lot of air. And we put it in a little ported box, and we can get it to 3 dB down to 80, and that's it. So if you start beating on these things with a lot of power, they'll just distort. The voice coil's out of the gap, it just can't play that loud. So keep in mind that it's not for every application. Now, if you put an inline filter in line with the thing, so you're pulling the lows off of it, then you can put 30 watt peaks on this thing pretty easily. And you could set these up in a room with some subs, and they sound phenomenal. In fact, we demonstrated that by setting a pair up in here, and we set them about 4 or 5 feet from the listening position up on stands, blended them to the servo subs, and rolled the bottom end off with an inline filter. And the quality of sound from these things was just phenomenal. The vocals are just beautiful out of this little driver. And we thought it was so fantastic. We set up some microphones out in front of it and started taking recordings. So we started playing with mic position and stuff and figured out if we put the mic about 2.5 feet in front of this little driver and blended the subs with it, we got some really good recordings. And playing those recordings back, we realized these things sound phenomenal. I mean, I've not ever heard anybody record their audio system, even if it's a $250,000 system, and record how it sounds in their room, and it even be anywhere close to what we got as far as measurements of the little LGK in this listening room. This thing it crushed every in-room recording I've ever heard out there on YouTube by a huge margin. So it got me to thinking, we need to do this some more. This is so phenomenal. The comparison really needed to be to the original recording, not to what somebody else got in their room, which is a different room and a different microphone and different speakers and a different placement. And there's a ton of variables there. So you really can't compare someone else's recording to the recording that we did. It doesn't make any sense. It's not really an apples-to-apples recording or apples-to-apples comparison. So we started comparing it, like I said, to the original recording, and it was just stunning how good it was. So it gave us some ideas, and we carried that over into this next model. And I want to introduce this next model. Let me set the little LGK 2.0 here on the floor. Get that out of the way. And let's talk about this little speaker. This is the new 2.1 model. It's the next version up. It's got the same 3-inch full-range driver, but we stuck a little 5-inch woofer down below it, and it crosses at about 350 hertz. So the little wideband driver is still carrying a wide range. It's just rolling the lows off of it. We're protecting it a little bit. We've got big capacitor in line with it, and we're letting this little 5-incher down here handle the bottom end. So power handling shot way up. It's still limited as to how hard you can beat on it. I mean, it's a sealed box. It's not a ported enclosure. It's just a 5-inch woofer. You can send it 30 watt peaks, full range, something like that. Anything more than that, you're going to run out of X-Max. And if you do the same thing that we did with the little one, if you filter the lows off of it, so it's not playing full range, and then you let some subwoofers handle the very bottom end, why then you can put quite a bit more power on it. We have some 60 watt amps in here, and we beat on them pretty good with it, and it sounded phenomenal. I mean, phenomenal. We're keeping a small surface area here around this full range driver, and these are truncated on the sides, and we've turned it so that it's right at the very edge of the sides there. So we're keeping a small baffle, and that's important when it comes to imaging and soundstage layering and things like that. You don't want a lot of surface area on the speaker in front of the drivers here, or around the drivers. So this thing's kept pretty small, and it's designed for desktop applications. I mean, it's a great desktop speaker. It's a little bigger than the 2.1, but it's smaller than something like the Encore, and you can put a little juice to it if you want. And it's also good for small rooms and applications where you're getting it out into the room and you're blending it with some subs. You can use it for rear surrounds. There's a lot of applications for this thing. And we took what we learned from recording the little 2.0s, and we set some recording gear up in here, and we had some fun with that thing, and we made some great recordings. I can't wait to tell you about that. Before I get to that, though, let's talk about the one thing you're going to ask me about right away is how does it compare to the Encore? So let's cover that first. So it's still very different. I mean, the Encore's got a 6.5-inch woofer. It's got a lot more throw, and it's got higher sensitivity. This is 87 dB sensitivity. This is back here at 85. So if you're trying to reproduce a set of drums at a realistic level, I can tell you right now, these aren't going to do it. They're not going to do it. Now, the encores, if you roll the bottom off them a little bit and you dish some of the really lows off to a sub, you can really put the power to these things, and you can pretty accurately recreate a whole set of drums. And these little suckers will pound, and they'll give some pretty good output levels. Whereas if you try to do that with this, you run out of air. You can only move so much air, and your drums will start to sound a little thin. Then again, if they're sitting right in front of you on a desktop, you're not going to need to put much power on them to play things like that. They're going to be louder than you can stand to listen to them pretty quickly because you're not that far away. So they're not for trying to recreate drums at an accurate playback level. Not the application. Now, how do they sound in the vocal region? Oh, man. Do these things sound good on the vocal regions? This little driver is phenomenal, and its strength is in that vocal region. I like the vocals as good or better than the encore in almost every application. The vocals in these things are beautiful. What about the top end? You know, when we do A-B comparisons with these, and I go back and forth a little bit, my first impression is, well, the XLS Encore has a little better resolution, a little better detail. The highs are a little more there. And that is the first impression. And, of course, the diaphragm of this little tweeter is smaller in diameter, and it's faster than this little 3-incher. While the 3-incher is very fast, doesn't have much moving mass, so in those lower regions, it crushes these bigger, heavier moving mass drivers. But when you compare it to a tweeter, there is some trade-off there. However, as I started going back and forth, I realized the detail and the resolution is there. It's really there. It's just not pushed forward in the soundstage. And I noticed with any two-way driver, as you notice, the tweeter's a little more forward of the woofer often, and we have to compensate for that with the crossover so that they arrive in time. But the highs are always a little more forward. They're a little more pushed forward in the sound stage and a little separate from everything else, versus with this little wideband driver, the detail and the resolution is there, but it's pushed back in the sound stage a little deeper. It's a little more coherent and a little more part of everything else. So it really doesn't give up anything in that regard. It sounds phenomenal. So that's what I've got to say about the comparison. Similar in some ways, very different applications. But all in all, man, these things sound fantastic. Also, we've got a center channel version of this that we're doing, where it is one of these little drivers with a little white woofer on each side, a little 5-inch, so you can use it as a center channel. You could even turn it up on its end. It'll handle a little more power, and this little driver just works great for a center channel. Oh, another difference, better pick up on this, in this driver versus a tweeter is the dispersion. Now there's pros and cons here too. The smaller a diaphragm gets, the wider the off-axis response is. In other words, it tends to throw a wider image. Anytime a diaphragm is playing a wavelength where that wavelength is shorter than the diaphragm, it tends to beam. In other words, it tends to be very directional, whereas a smaller driver, same way, is very directional at high frequency, but it's so much smaller that the dispersion characteristics is very wide. As soon as you move off axis on it, it's got a little more output than a full range driver. However, this is kind of in a sweet spot. For full range drivers, as you get into 5, 6-inch, there's a lot of these 6 and 8-inch full range drivers out there. There's even some companies making full range drivers that are 10, 12, and 15 inches in diameter. And they have no off-axis response at all, even like an 8-inch driver. As soon as you move out from being dead on in the driver, dead on axis, the whole top end completely falls off. They have no off-axis. So these big 8-inch full range drivers have a hot spot that you aim at your head as you're listening. As soon as you move out of that any at all, it just completely falls apart. There's no high frequency at all. And it gives you a very uneven room response. These seem to be kind of in a sweet spot. The little 3-inch driver still has very good off-axis response, but it's a little more controlled. So, pro or con? Well, kind of depends on the application again. If you're in a well-treated room and you've got these speakers well out in the room, then there's some advantage to going to a tweeter and having that bigger, broader off-axis response. Most people, though, don't have well-treated rooms. The rooms are average living rooms and things like that. And if your room's overly bright, this is an advantage. It's a little more controlled dispersion. And if you're sitting right in front of it on your desktop, then it's an advantage there as well. So, pros and cons, yes. Which is better? Depends on the application. So, and we have a version of this also that's a little tower version that we're coming out with. It's this same driver and 4 of these little woofers down below it and a little tower. So that's coming. We're doing a whole product line of these things, starting with the little desktop 2.0 and then going to the 2.1, the 2.2, and the 2.4. These are going to be great for small rooms, great for small theater systems, and just a great bang for your buck. At these price points, good luck beating these in the application that they're designed for. Good luck beating these in sound quality. I mean, they're that good. They are really that good. And the recordings that we made really bear that out. Again, we set these up in this listening room. We set the microphones 2.5 feet in front of them. And so we had one on the left and one on the right. I blended the servo sub so that it would have a little bottom end. So we want to hear the whole file, the whole music, the whole song, if you will. And we want it to sound exactly like, or as close as we can to the original. So I couldn't just play these with a restricted low end. You'd know, okay, it's thin at the bottom. It doesn't sound like the original. So we brought these subwoofers up, set in front of it, balanced it, made it to where it sounded perfect, and then we made the recordings. Now, what we learned afterward was that with the microphone only 2.5 feet in front of this thing, these tended to be a little bit louder than the subwoofers that we blended them with, versus what we're hearing 5 feet away at the listening position. So in the recording, the bottom end is a little thinner than the actual file. If you play back the actual file, you'll note the bottom end isn't quite there, but that isn't a product of the sound of the speaker as much it's the product of a variable that we had, and that's just happened to be the way we adjusted it. The whole bottom end in the recording is completely variable. We could have brought that level up, we could have brought it down, we could have made it bass heavy, we could have made it sound any way we wanted. What we did was make it sound to where it was accurate at the listening position, and then we took the recording. Again, since the microphone was only 2.5 feet in front of the speaker, this was a little bit louder in the recording compared to the woofers, so it's a little thinner. So you have to keep that in mind. So what I did was I picked 3 tracks that really showed off the speaker. I picked a song from Jack Johnson that was Subplots. It's the first track on one of his newer albums, and the vocals in these things sound so fantastic. The detail level, the clarity, everything about it, phenomenal. Then we picked out one of my favorite tracks from Alison Krauss's Live at Union Station, and I picked a new favorite. And her voice, just beautiful voice, man, just captivating. Of course, we're hearing it through my system with a tube preamp and things like that with my DA converter and things, which sounds very analog. So what we're getting in the recording is very smooth, very lush, but also still very comparable to the original. The last artist I select, one of my favorites, Vienna Tang. I've seen her live many times, and if you're an audiophile, you owe it to yourself to go out there and buy her first 3 or 4 albums. They're all fantastic, and they are recorded really well. You'll love them. They're great recordings, and they're great music. She writes her own music and her lyrics, and she's fantastic. And the song that I picked was Anna Rose, and you guys are going to like it. And what I'm going to do is we took the recordings and we've made it to where you can click on the link below and you can download the recording. And that's the way we want you to play it back. We want you to download it and then play it back on your system. That way you have the actual file that we recorded and not a compressed YouTube file. Now, I'm going to give you links to the same songs that you can go to on YouTube, and you can watch the YouTube video of the exact same track that we recorded. And you'll note in the comparison that the recording that we made of these sounds a lot better than playing it back on the YouTube video. Of course, the YouTube video is a compressed file format, and these sound so good that it makes the difference in the file formats very evident, and it makes the YouTube file sound pretty dull. So we're also going to make available for you guys that same song that you can click on. You can download that song and compare it to this recording that we made of the same track. And I want you guys to set this thing up and listen and hear how good these things really are and how accurate they are. It's amazing, really, that it sounds as good as it does. There's not that many speakers out there that are at such a reference level and are so balanced from end to end that whatever you play back from it sounds so much like the original track, it's scary. These little drivers will definitely do it. So that's kind of the challenge for you guys. Go out there and make some of these comparisons. Take a little time, download the file, play it back, and be stunned. Be prepared to be stunned. These are going to set kind of a new benchmark at this price point. The total right now, the way we're offering it, for this kit with the flat pack, which just means this cabinet all CNC cut and ready to glue up, is going to be $525. So it's crazy, really, that we can offer this level of performance at $525 with the cabinet. This is we've never offered this big of a value in my mind before than this speaker. Now, what we did with this one is we just busted out some Duratex, just roller coated it with a couple of coats of Duratex, and that's it. There's holes in the back of it here for the tube connectors. The crossover fits in the bottom of the cabinet just barely. It does take up some space. The low crossover points mean big values. But we try to use parts that offer the best sound for the money and still keep this thing at a low price point. That was the goal, keep it at a low price point, and we did. So $525, there you go. It's a good starter kit if you really want to get into DIY and you want to find out just how good and how much performance you can get by building it yourself rather than buying it. That's the way to go. So that's it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys got some information from it that's useful. Like I said, it was a little bit of a tech talk, but I'm excited about this new product, and I hope you guys like it. It'll be available for you to click on and order it online once the video is released. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. See you guys in the next video.